Okay, let's get started. You're actually going to be in for a treat today with our very first speaker, who is Dr. Kevin Johnson. He is the David L. Cohen University Professor of Pediatrics, Biomedical Informatics and Science Communication. And among many other things, Kevin is a board-certified pediatrician who specializes in developing and implementing clinical information systems and artificial intelligence, AI, to advance medical research and enhance patient safety. And he promotes effective bedside use of the technology and, in essence, empowers patients with new tools to understand how medications and supplements may impact their health. And he's, as it will become, I think, patently obvious, he's interested in utilizing advanced technologies such as smart devices and in creating computer-based documentation systems for point-of-care use. And this is going to be very, very relevant to what Bill Hansen will be talking about a little bit later in the course. And as if that's not enough, Kevin is involved in digital media to improve science communication, which is something very, very close to my heart. And he has served as editor, currently serves as editor, for a children's book series, and it's called Who? Me? Which features inspiring biographies of scientists that young readers can relate to as people like themselves. And I absolutely applaud and endorse that endeavour. Before coming to Penn, Kevin was the Cornelius Vanderbilt Professor and Chair of the Department of Biomedical Informatics at the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, and as the Senior Vice President for Health Information Technology at that institution, he led the development of clinical systems that enable doctors to make better treatment and care decisions for individual patients. Operative word there, individual. And he was really very significant in introducing new systems to integrate AI. And this was long before it became really a hot button issue or a major news item, AI in patient care workflows. So what Kevin's going to do today is he's going to share with us some of the trials and tribulations and I think some of the significant accomplishments of AI in medicine. And the title of his talk is Translating the Hope of AI in Medicine to Reality, the Promise, the Challenges, and the Cautionary Tale. Kevin.
Thank you. Wow, that was a lot. I'm writing you a much shorter version.
Okay.
Nice to see everybody. I love it when people say things like, he's a whiz-bang with technology. My presentation is on here, but I can't get it to work. So we are going to show, I'm going to try to show one thing on this computer because there's just no other easy way to show it to everybody. So when I get to that point, I'm not even going to try. When I get to that point, it might be worth me asking you to kind of crowd around this for just a second, because the thing I'm going to show requires, you want to see the screen. It's pretty cool. I am going to talk a little bit more than you probably want to hear about the history of AI, but I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. I recognize, how many of you now, I better be 100%, how many of you have used generative AI in the last year? And the embarrassed person put their hand up, so that's good. Everybody's, believe it or not, I give talks around the world now, and since 2023, for like the first 2 years, 1.5 years, that number was basically 20% of the room. So they would invite me to give a talk, and I would say, how many of you have used the most recent and most possibly transformative piece of AI in your life, second only to your Roomba, cleaning your floors? And the answer was basically 2 out of every 10 people. So I used to have this whole speech about, I would rather leave the room and let you spend time using AI because you'll learn more from it. So with you guys, I expect super hard questions. Really push me back against the wall. We have a lot of time at the end for questions. Then we're going to talk a little bit about types of AI very briefly. Opportunities in medicine, I actually shortened because it's just moving so fast. I would much rather talk to you about what I see now. And then we'll spend a little bit of time on ethical considerations. We're not going to try this, but if it worked, we were going to have some questions this way. So I'm going to ask you instead to do me a favor. Everybody has some device on which they can type a word, right? Take 1 minute and then use in one word on your device, because I want you to be honest, describe the U.S. healthcare system. I allow hyphenations like evidence-based. Anybody know what that song's from? Still better. I used to have all these slides with all my favorite movie quotes, and I realized last year nobody actually has ever seen any of those movies. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I figured it out. It's
And I'm the king of dad jokes, so. Okay, I think everyone seems to have finished typing, except maybe Andy. Andy, are you still typing?
not.
Okay, good. All right. Let's try it this way. I'm going to put you four on the spot, because and then I'm hoping you guys will raise your hands. So Lexi, one word, healthcare.
Policy driven.
How many people had something like that? You're unique. That's good. Alexa?
Expansive.
What's that mean for you?
Like, I'm comparing it to something like the NHS. I think it's wide-reaching. There's a lot more fields. That's what
Okay, expansive. Anybody have something like that? This is going to be great. Okay, good. There's two. You guys, you should write these down. These are going to be really good. Catherine?
Well, I wrote symptom treating, like more
Symptoms.
focused on symptoms rather than root causes.
So disease-based, if you will. How many anybody have a couple of people? Okay. Shivika? Shivika?
Yeah.
Or is it Shivika?
Shivaka.
Shivika, thank you. I can handle it.
I said innovative.
Innovative. How many people have innovative? Should be a couple. All right. Just help me out. What other words did you all come up with? I'll just go ahead.
Unjust.
Expensive.
Convoluted.
So this back row, clearly that's where my head was for a lot of this. So that's exactly right. Yep.
Decentralized.
Decentralized.
Systematic.
Systematic. That's a good word. You've already had your name up at least twice.
Profit driven.
Say it again.
Profit driven.
Yep. Okay. Gary?
Strained.
Say that again.
Strained.
Strange.
Strained.
Oh, strained.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely true.
I put multi-payer.
Yep. That's true.
I also wrote expensive.
Okay. Phoebe?
Oh, costly, but it's basically expensive.
Okay.
I put privately owned.
Okay. How do you say your name, by the way?
Drew.
Drew. Easy enough.
Is it insufficient?
Yep. That's a great one.
Treatment based, wait, someone said that. Yeah.
That's good though. That's good.
Inequitable.
Portable?
Inequitable.
Inequitable. Got it. Yeah, just, okay, got it. Had to get this Prasadi part right. Yes.
Fast.
Yep.
Strictly regulated.
Yep. Kind of, yep. That's probably something you guys will talk about a lot in this class. I can just tell you, it's very regulated when it comes to the things that are actually relatively inexpensive. It's surprisingly unregulated for some of the things that may be the most expensive, and that's a whole conversation.
Long.
Okay, good. So that's a fantastic list. I wish we had a chance to do the word cloud, because then we could have all seen that actually forming, and there's a few that have overlapped. But here are the four words that come up the most frequently when we talk about this, right? So innovative comes up, and it is arguably innovative. If you look at what's happening to our GDP, and again, this is a place where I do not need to spend a lot of time on this, but I'll just say this one point. A lot of our healthcare spending comes from tech, and that tech we typically push out. There's a lot of healthcare spending for this country too, arguably in a lot of the wrong places, but the innovation that we have is a part of what we spend a lot of our taxpayer dollars on, up until at least the last 8 months. Inequitable came up, I think that's obvious. Complex came up, also a great point. Resilient. I put resilient in, and you'll notice I put a picture of a needle. Why might I have put a picture of a needle? What's a good example of resilience in the last 5 years?
COVID is, I guess, what I first thought of, like vaccines.
That's what I would have thought. Exactly. See, I think if you know what happened during COVID, then you will see not just our public health response, but literally entire health systems having to take parking lots and make those sites where they administered vaccines, or stadiums and making those basically makeshift ICUs. So there are dozens of examples of how much we completely transformed our healthcare system to support that emergency. including, unfortunately, New York City, which had the problem of a lot of deaths, and how to even expand more. So just all parts of the system were really taxed, and I think we came out in flying colors. Not going to cover this with you except to say, U.S., lowest health life expectancy, continues to get worse. U.S. spends more on healthcare than any other country. Okay, so we are high in one way, and it's the wrong way, low in another way, also the wrong way. And that sets up this whole idea of what should we be trying to fix in this country. Made even worse, I'm a primary care doctor in pediatrics. And without getting into a ton of detail about it, there are now major reports, this is from Kaiser Family Foundation, that talk about the fact that primary care is really a field in crisis. And we particularly noticed that about 80% of internal medicine residents who say, 2/3 of which say they want to be primary care doctors, don't by the time they leave. And that is such a serious issue that we're going to try to feature that conversation in a little documentary I'm producing about primary care. Office visits to primary care clinicians are projected to continually increase to a number that is unsustainable, which is over 900,000. Some people ask the question, and if you guys want to, we can talk about it, why do we even need primary care? There is a need for an additional roughly 60,000 primary care docs. Average primary care clinicians work 18 hours a day. We have done one thing in the last 5 years to make that number lower, and it is, anybody know? It is ambient scribing, which I'll talk about very briefly, which is the first commercially available AI that's been used and has documented decreases in physician and nurse practitioner burden. Approximately 48% of physicians report various signs of burnout, which are essentially depersonalization, emotional exhaustion, lack of motivation of the 3 hours you remember. I'm sure there's a fourth one because there are 4, but I don't remember what it is. So, I think you all understand some of this. I just want to make sure it's clear to you that in the world of artificial intelligence broadly, there's all set of methods and a set of approaches that are typically used. And they actually have some subtle nuances in terms of how you would evaluate them. So you guys won't be building these things, but you will be testing them. And it's important to understand when you test each one, what evaluation metrics really help you to understand how well it's working. So artificial intelligence has been around a long time, since the 50s. The so-called Turing test was one of the first areas of understanding what machine intelligence could be about, and that actually predated anything relating to the level of computer access we have now. Really, the computer access that you all experience now, not counting your smartphones, started at about 1980 with the IBM PC, okay? And it's been going sort of steadily up since then, really 79, 80, but let's just say 80. In the 90s was when machine learning started happening. We needed more computing power. And so in the 50s, there were mainframe computers in a few places, like here with the ENIAC. In case you didn't know, we have a little piece of one of the first major computers, the ENIAC, over in engineering. You can go take pictures of it. It's actually kind of a cool thing to think about if you read the history of it. But in the 90s, we started having mini computers available, which were basically a computer that a whole campus could use. Didn't have to be as big as a mainframe, but it was big enough. And so groups could buy a mini computer, like say Wharton, and do their own machine learning, because they had enough computing power to do that work. By 2010, we started learning about this idea of deep learning, which was these multiple layers that are hidden. And you guys know a lot about this already. And then, of course, in the 2020s, we've now been dealing with generative AI, which has really exploded people's understanding of at least some parts of what AI is. Arguably, if we stopped a conversation about machine learning, that we need to continue. Feel free to interrupt me, guys, as much as you need to. Just an example of this. These are 2 programs. I will not mention everybody who's done everything, but here, this is an example of, golly, Weizenbaum's first name is Joseph Weizenbaum and Kenneth Colby, who both wrote these AI systems that do the kinds of things we think about today as commonplace with GPT. But at the time, ELIZA and Perry, these 2 systems, were revolutionary. The idea that ELIZA could actually have a conversation with you and ask questions, and that Perry could actually answer questions as if it was a human being, just amazed people. The main reason they were amazed has to do with this. Does anybody know what programming language this is? Just checking. You'd be surprised. I'm always surprised how many people know these things. So this is a programming, I'm sure on there somewhere, there must be a word on it. There's not. So this is a programming language called Lisp. which stands for List Symbolic Processing. And List was the language of AI. So all of this code I needed to write one function, which is take the number 1,122 and convert it to words. So that's one itsy bitsy teeny little piece of code. You would take tens of thousands of lines of code to do any of the projects that I just showed you, like Eliza and Perry. And so a reason why all of this took so long is the language was hard. The compute back then, relative to today, was unheard of. The memory that one needed to store these big programs was unheard of. And so this would literally be something you'd have one mini computer just doing this. I actually had one called a Sun Microsystems computer when I was in medical school first year. So during that period of time, when Eliza came out and Perry came out, AI took off. And we started seeing examples that I'm not going to go through here, but there was a project called Dendril at Stanford, which started to recognize this idea that if we had more data, AI could get stronger. And we then went from that system to a period where everybody was talking about AI back in the 1960s and 70s. But as you can see on this slide, and again, I'm going to speed up a little bit here. As you can see on this slide, we had two different periods where everybody was excited about it, and then everything stopped. And those are called AI winters. And they happened for a couple of different reasons. Primarily, it's because we got a lot of investment in AI that failed. So the NIH was paying for it, philanthropy was paying for things, obviously entrepreneurs were paying for things, and then they didn't work. So you can only do that a couple of times before the attention moves to something else. We also started seeing decreasing funding from all of the major investors, including the Department of Defense, who basically said, your research is no longer this research we want to be paying for. And so what researchers did was they started changing the words of the work they did without actually stopping the work. And so they started creating words like knowledge bases became ontologies, or machine learning and medicine, or machine learning became knowledge discovery, et cetera, making the work less visible, less connected. But then, and I wasn't kidding when I said this, the iRobot released a Roomba. How many people's houses have an automatic robot? Probably at least 50%, right? So this was actually the first real AI that was in your face in your house. And most people were, it's like it memorizes the room configuration. It doesn't fall down the steps. So it's using computer vision. It recognizes dirty parts of the carpet, and it goes multiple times. So it was pretty sophisticated when you actually look at it. And the coolest thing for most of us was it could find its way back to its own base and recharge itself. And that was amazing work. It combined multimodal data to create a robot. This was the first example we had in the 2000s, and this company did quite well, so much so that there's a bunch of those now. Around the same exact time, we were getting enough compute that groups like AlphaGo and others put together the work that they've done in DeepMind. You all know a lot of this, but it's really important to note that we were also always thinking about medicine. Medicine has always been behind. Can anybody tell me why medicine might be behind? Yeah.
Why medicine might be behind with AI. Maybe part of it is the regulations going around, let's say like data. So you need to user consent, so it's hard to get data. And also for it to be commercialized, it probably also takes longer because there's also a lot of regulation.
You literally just said all three of them. Give the class a chance. No. So regulation is a really big part of it. They're actually independent. So regulation is a giant part that has to do with either private or even partially public restrictions on the way certain types of work can occur, where things can be deployed, etc. The FDA is a good example of that. Data is the biggest reason. It's number one, which is medical data are private. So even in the absence of regulations or HIPAA, some people just don't want their data being used for these kinds of experiments. Contrast to what most of these models are doing now, which is they're basically training their vision models on YouTube and TikTok. So they're just grabbing every piece of video everywhere. And it's actually driving a business that you may have heard about. It was actually in the New York Times this week. For more and more people to be content creators, there's actually hypotheses that because sports gaming is so, and betting in this country has gotten so out of control, there's so many addictions, that's fueling college football. Like college football and high school football getting recorded, being seen, creates data that we can now use for these models. So the whole world is really changing the way it thinks about the commodity of data, but healthcare cannot do that unless we come up with some innovative ways like synthetic data to create enough data to build these models. But that's kind of where we are, and that's one of the reasons why the first place where we were able to do anything interesting in healthcare was image analysis, because images are largely de-identified, and patients don't really have anything at risk for most of images, as long as you take their nameplate off the image, right? So you can get giant, huge repositories of images, and you can start to train the models. And the one thing that we learned from the project I mentioned at Stanford, Denver, was more data means more power. And that's still the current world we're in. That may not stay that way, but that's where we are.
How do you keep power
Since I have a minute,
forever over something that's much more powerful than you?
Documentary that just came out about
My whole life goal is to solve artificial general intelligence. I think this is a hugely critical moment for all humanity. There's no time to waste. Will you not be listening to what I'm saying? I actually got into AI through games. I was the second highest rated chess player in the world for my age. So I've always been thinking about thinking.
So you're going to study neuroscience. What's the end game?
I wanted to explore the edge of the universe.
That's not a normal person you find in a tech company. They introduced the idea that they could beat the top-level Go players in a game that was thought to be incomputable.
It's amazing. It's discovered its own attacking style, you know.
And they had a little chart of how much better they were getting.
Oh, holy monkey.
And I said, when does this stop?
The ultimate goal was to crack real-world challenges. I've never stopped thinking about the protein folding problem. The potential to help solve Alzheimer's, dementia, and drug discovery is huge. I thought it would need AI to do it.
I did think to myself, well, good luck.
If you are at the forefront of science,
this makes no sense.
You will fail a great deal.
We were the best in the world at a problem the world's not good at. We sucked.
And then suddenly,
We've done this thing, and it might be kind of a big deal.
that's very, very cool.
I was gobsmacked.
I was just excited.
It'll be the biggest thing ever.
These are gifts to humanity.
There's so many things that got to be cracked, but I won't give up until it's done.
What is it that you like about this game?
It's just a good thinking game.
So that's Demis Hassabis, who is the head of DeepMind, was a big part of all of these teams, but has been a real innovator, thinking about the edges of medicine that we can do things with AI. And that is the beginning, if you listen to their story, of when AI was actually taking off in other areas of medicine and the rest of the world, other disciplines, without most of us knowing about it. Right? We knew that people were beating Go and people were playing chess, but it didn't seem like it was anything real until AlphaFold came along, and suddenly drug discovery is turned completely on its side because every possible configuration of every possible protein is now for free. They gave it all away for everybody to use for discovery. So pretty amazing stuff. As you mentioned, the FDA is a big part of this, but the FDA has been approving many AI technologies, especially obviously in medicine. So you can see the list here. You'll have all my slides. I won't go through them all because this list is out of date. This is old, by the way, and it's really, even if I made it up to date tomorrow, it will be out of date within a few weeks because there's a ton coming out right now. Every company is developing various pieces of systems. Right now, there is AI. This is the continuum of care as we think about it. There is AI technology being used in every aspect of this continuum of care, although most of the time, these are toy systems. So there's somebody showing how you can do it, but you can't go into a room at 10 and say, oh, show me how you're using AI for embryo selection. First of all, you wouldn't get close to that room. But if you could get in that room, they would tell you, yeah, we saw those papers, but we don't, people are paying us a lot of money, and we don't want to trust AI to that. But we know that image analysis, works beautifully in that space. So then we get into the ethics and some of the other issues. So the roles that AI plays are four. This is one of the take-home slides. You should be able to remember this. So there's what we call detection, which is essentially also often called classification, which is looking at a particular set of information and deciding whether it is or it isn't something. Then there's predictive, and you'll see an example of each of these, which is identifying patients, for example, who are likely to respond to a particular therapy. The best example of that is some of us have liver enzymes that metabolize medications differently. So it would be better to put you on a different medication than the ones that your body may not metabolize correctly. Prognostic, which is identifying patients who are more likely to have a particular outcome. And then the last is generative, which we've talked about a lot already. So this is just a simple example of prediction. And as I mentioned, imaging was first, okay? So this is using AI of the prostate to identify patients with near perfect accuracy of prostate cancer. And for those of us who've had any relatives with prostate cancer, you can actually have your prostate cancer diagnosed now almost without a biopsy. They almost always do a confirmatory biopsy, but MRI of the prostate has become so darn good that they can actually do what's called Gleason scoring of the prostate itself without actually doing anything interventional. So it's pretty remarkable. And then the reason for the biopsies is different. There are symptom checkers all over the place. Everybody's seen one. If you haven't seen one, it's easy to go online and see them. But these are basically tools that are being developed, whether we like it or not, to help patients to do self-diagnosing. More than 15 million people, that number is probably now double that, use symptom checkers per month that are likely to keep growing. And the utility and the promise of these cannot be materialized if they don't prove to be accurate. Because again, every layer of AI has a different mode of evaluation. These are actually quite tricky to evaluate, especially once they get out in the wild, right? Because if the symptom checker says you have a particular type of rash and you can't get to a dermatologist, but you took a medicine and it treated it, then maybe it was right, maybe it was wrong. Maybe your rash was going to go away. There's no way to know. So word of mouth, if you go to Reddit, for example, and TikTok, will make these things look amazing or awful, depending on what you actually pay attention to. We need stronger studies. Predictive AI, these pictures, and most of my pictures that look like this are generated by some AI tool. This is ChatGPT. And the idea here is, when you're doing predictive AI, you want this person to be the one who gets the prediction so that they don't become this person, right? So the goal is to have somebody who's apparently well with subtle signs and symptoms that let everybody know this is not going to end well with high probability, so that we can aggressively treat people at this stage before they get into this stage. Great example of that was this paper that came out by Gallo, Effectiveness of AI-Enabled Interventions for Detecting Clinical Deterioration. This is one of the other AI technologies that is everywhere right now in healthcare. Not everybody pays attention to it. We could talk about that. But a lot of our EHR systems now have the ability to put a flag next to a patient who it appears is clinically deteriorating. And it will amaze you, because you would think, well, clearly the doctors and the nurses can see it, but you can't always. And I've personally seen a lot of patients who just about die. Like they're just looking fine, and then they just crash, as we call them. But the signs and symptoms are there in retrospect. So when we have our morbidity and mortality rounds, and we go through their cases, the experts in the room who now have the benefit of a retrospectoscope can be like, yeah, right here somebody should have seen that rash developing and increased the antibiotics, and so suddenly you feel terrible. But these tools can help. Prognostic AI. Can a photograph help predict the patient who will have cancer? This just came out this year. Without getting into a ton of I don't think I have another picture on that. Yeah. Without getting into a ton of data about this right now, the idea is that when two different patients, it's interesting. I had a conversation with one of my students yesterday about this. I hadn't thought of it. When two different patients present with the same stage of a cancer, they will get the exact same care. It makes sense, maybe. But if one of those patients happens to be in a family who everybody lives till like 90 to 100, and the other one everybody dies at 60 to 70, or if one of them is just a little bit worn out, like their body just looks a little beaten up, maybe they have many, many comorbidities, maybe they're not in great cardiovascular shape, maybe they're a little too skinny, maybe their diet's not quite exactly, perfect, it's entirely possible that they will have very different outcomes with the same med that was visible and predictable at the very beginning. These guys have now started to show that. They said that we can actually use AI to predict your sort of physiologic age. And when two patients come in and a clinician might decide not to treat patient A or B because of the likelihood that the disease could overtake them pretty quickly, These are data that actually in cancer can say this patient is going to act more like a 40-year-old than a 70-year-old. And so you should go ahead and give them much more aggressive care. And we are finding that it actually makes a difference, that it actually does improve outcomes by doing this facial recognition thing. So this is brand new work. I fully expect that we're going to see pushback from it. I'm absolutely certain there's going to be biases related to the training model and different ethnicities, but we still at least realize there's something there and it's worth spending some time thinking about it. And again, really easy data, right? Because you could all take a picture with your phone and theoretically send it in and get a chronologic age. So if you want to go start a business, that would be a good one to do. And suddenly they're all like, ooh, wow, that's a good idea. So generative AI, we know a lot about it. It's large language models. There are large language models that are used in a couple of different ways. There's this so-called encoder and decoder set of models. But the key thing is, most of us are using generative AI models to create. But you can also use generative AI models to predict. The very sophisticated of those are called generative adversarial networks, or GANs, where the idea of a GAN is to say, this is the best I could possibly write something, but critique it anyway. And the reason why we use GANs is especially in areas where we're trying to develop something synthetically that looks exactly like something that is not synthetic. So almost everything that we've done in the early days of image development used two sets of models. One that creates the image and one that tries to prove something about the image. Have you ever heard of deepfakes? Anybody heard of deepfakes? So deepfakes were the first area where people heard about GANs a lot. The idea was, you take my picture, you give it to a model, the model creates a rendering of me. Or you take a couple of pictures of me in different angles, and it creates a 3D representation of me. You then give another model both my true image and the generated image, and ask it to figure out which one is me. So here's a little math for you. When you have successfully deepfaked, how often does the model that is critiquing get it right?
50%.
Very good. Why is that?
Because if it's a deep fake, if it's a true deep fake, then they wouldn't be able to distinguish between the two, so they have 50% probability.
Exactly. Everybody, that takes a little second to think about. But yeah, the goal of it is to get a probability of 0.5 when you say which of these is true. Because that means it can't tell. It's flipping a coin. Therefore, you have successfully deepfaked that person. And I won't get into all these details. I think you all know how this works. GPT just does next pixel prediction. Pixels can be or next token prediction. Tokens can be words. They can be pixels. They can now be sound. Almost every one of the generative models now has an audio in, audio out thing. Maybe this is, and I'll just show you something in a second. And because of those approaches, we are now able to create these really clever chatbots. The first set of chatbots were all language in, like words in, words out, and those have been quite well studied. This is one of the first ones, this is one of the first papers that came out that was in JAMA, and it talked about this idea that if we took conversations that were happening online and then simulated that exact conversation using GPT, and then asked a group of code experts, it was a small group in this study, to evaluate the two. They came up with things like, well, the accuracy is hard to see a difference, but this one is more empathetic, and that was typically the GPT one, et cetera, et cetera. So this paper was the first to say chatbots appear to have more empathy when patients judge them than clinicians do. Roundly criticized, of course, because anybody could be empathetic if they had absolutely nothing to think about at that moment except you. But in the real world, your pager's going off, there's another patient in the waiting room, somebody just died, and your brain is just not there to process how nice you want to be to this person. Nevertheless, does that make it bad, or does that just simply make it a useful collaborative tool? Right? We'll come back to that. This is the paper that Chris Longhurst and his group did at San Diego, which essentially took that first study and started doing more comparisons with chatbot responses, and you can kind of see what's happening here. The darker blue is physicians, the gray is chatbots, and if you look at the quality, being very poor to very good, there's a significant overlap. That's the deep fake space, where they both look about the same. If you look at response options, more empathetic or not, there is this also little bit of a declining tail but there is almost equivalent data here with empathy. I think it slightly favors empathy on the chatbot side when you look at it statistically. I'm going to try this. Cannot guarantee it's going to work. So let's try it on my phone. And I'm going to ask for a volunteer. No, I've already called on you. Come on up. That's right, it's Drew. Right now, it's not Drew. What's his name again?
I'm Akshay.
Okay, Akshay, yes. Hi,
Yes.
Kevin. Nice to see
Hi.
you. Good to see you. Okay, let's try this. So, you're going to use a chatbot.
Oh,
This chatbot is designed to provide me, your doctor, with a summary of what's bothering you before you come to the clinic, okay? So just for the fun of it, 3 different people, you have to remember this, 3 different people give him something really hard that he's supposed to discuss with this chatbot before he comes to the clinic. You can call on him.
What's up? Knee hurts. Knee hurts. Okay, good.
Pressure in your ears.
Caution.
Pressure in your ears.
Depression. Depression.
Okay. Let's see if this works. That's the worst. Don't you hate when you like manage your demo? Where's the piece?
Depression. Oh no.
Hi, are you there?
Hello, I am PCP Bot. I'm an AI assistant who helps Dr. Physician's name prepare for your visit. Let's get started. Could you please tell me your name and the name of your physician?
Hello, PCP bot. My name is Akshay Kumar, and the name of my physician, I'm sorry, I forgot.
He might step up.
Dr. Kevin Johnson.
Hi, Akshay. I'm PCP Bot, your friendly AI assistant for Dr. Kevin Johnson. It's great to meet you. How are you doing today?
I am doing pretty terribly, unfortunately. You see, my knee hurts, I am depressed, and there's pressure in my ears.
I'm really sorry to hear that, Akshay. It sounds like you're dealing with quite a few things at once, and thank you for sharing that with me. Is this a good time for us to chat a bit more about these issues? The reason I'm here is to help gather some info so Dr. Johnson can make your visit as helpful as possible. And of course, everything you share is kept safe and confidential. Let me know if you're comfortable continuing.
Yep, I am comfortable continuing.
Great. Thanks, Akshay. I'm glad we can chat. So just to let you know, I'm here to gather a bit of info for Dr. Johnson so he can help you more efficiently during your visit. And if at any point there's something you'd rather talk about directly with him, that's absolutely okay. And just as a reminder, if anything feels like an emergency anytime, definitely call 911. But for now, let's dive in. Could you tell me a bit more about the reason for your visit and the symptoms you're experiencing?
Well, you see, my knee is killing me. I simply cannot walk on it at all. And the pressure in my earwaves is debilitating, to say the least. And I'm just too depressed to get out of bed.
I'm really sorry you're going through all of that, Akshay. It sounds like you're dealing with a lot of pain in your knee, and that ear pressure must be really tough. And on top of that, feeling too depressed to get out of bed is definitely something we want to help Dr. Johnson understand. So thank you for sharing that, and I appreciate you trusting me with that information. Let's dive a little bit more into each of these symptoms so we can help Dr. Johnson out. Let's start with your knee. Could you tell me how long you've been experiencing this knee pain and how it first started?
Just give it a couple.
My knee's been hurting for 2 weeks. I don't remember how it started. I just woke up one day. Perhaps I slept wrong. Perhaps I fell down the day before. Not too sure. But it started off aching lightly, and it has now reached a critical point to where I am no longer to use it ideally.
Got it, Akshay. So it sounds like this knee pain kind of crept up on you over the last couple of weeks, and you're not exactly sure what triggered it, and now it's gotten to the point where you really can't use that knee well at all. Thanks for explaining that. That's really helpful. Let's also talk a little bit about the character of that knee pain. Would you say it's more of a sharp pain, a dull ache, or maybe something else?
I have to go to work. Can I call you back later?
Of course, Akshay. Absolutely no problem at all. We can pick this up whenever you have a bit more time. It's important that you feel comfortable and not rushed. So just let me know when you're ready to chat again, and we'll continue from where we left off. It was great talking with you so far, and I hope you have a smooth day at work.
Thanks a lot. Would you please summarize this for the doctor and let me hear what you're going to say?
Absolutely, Akshay. I'll keep it short and to the point for Dr. Johnson. Here's a quick summary of what we've covered so far. Patient name Akshay Kumar. Complaints for 2 weeks. Onset unclear, now severe enough that he can't walk on it. Ear pressure described as debilitating. Depression severe enough that he's having trouble getting out of bed. And that's the gist of it. Once we chat more, I'll add the rest of the details. Thanks again, and take care.
Okay, you just used the chatbot. How did that go? How'd you think?
It was low-key pretty. It said my name too much. You know, it was,
Everybody says this. I don't know how to make it stop
it
doing
was
that.
way too empathetic. You know, like at some point I wanted it to just keep going.
So you wanted to be a dick? Is what you're
Yeah,
saying?
like a little bit, because when it just keeps on saying I'm so sorry, and then it says my name after that, I'm like, okay, but can we get to the point? You know, I want it to be more not so.
Got it. That's good.
But the other parts were good. Like it acted ideally to what I like. My sister is a practicing, or she wants to become a doctor. She's pre-med, and she sometimes pulls me aside to do these types of practice sessions. You know, because those pre-meds, they're all.
He was
crazy.
not a ringer. I really didn't know this.
And it's pretty similar to what she does.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Other thoughts? Not a one. Is anybody shocked? Go ahead.
I thought it was just like kind of regurgitating the information that Akshay gave, and it wasn't like kind of like offering any help. I'm not sure if it's supposed to do that.
It's not supposed to
it's
offer any help.
Yeah.
It's supposed to regurgitate exactly what he said, which means it did what it was supposed to do.
Okay.
If he had said he was going to try to kill himself, it would have stopped everything and said, we need to call 911.
Would it give information on as to like how he would have to like speak to his doctor, like medical procedures or anything like that, or is it simply just to like offer you something?
So here's the cool part about this. This is one of my students' projects. We're trying to build a thing that I'll explain later. I don't know what it's going to say. We have an 800-word prompt that gives it all sorts of information, all sorts of understanding about questions you ask for depression, questions you ask for all these other things. It's got built-in forms, and it's going through all that stuff. But you can ask it whatever you want. You could have said, you know, I'm trying to grow for Cynthia in my backyard. What's the right, fertilizer? And it may choose to answer that. We can't control when it decides to take a tangent. The prompt asks it to get back on track, but because of the empathy, also known as sycophantic activity that these things do, it's going to generally try to be as nice and accommodating. Think of it as this way. If you're selling this, you actually want it to be nice to people, except for the people who say, be a dick to me, or an asshole. And you can say that. You can actually have said to it, can you please stop saying my name, and would you mind being more to the point, and it will fix completely what it's doing. But most patients won't know that, which means when we do evaluations, and this is one of the reasons why the books that come out about speech recognition have said, you really have to test how it interacts with people more than how well it responds to the words. It used to be that the word recognition rate was so low that it would make a million mistakes. You notice none of those. It nailed the review. If I was a doctor hearing that, I'd know you have 3 complaints, and I'd know roughly how long we were, and we spent 5 minutes on the call. If you're sitting in your car driving to work, you could spend 20 minutes on that, and if your doctor actually reads it, then that could really expedite some time in the visit. So thank you. Well done. Round of hands.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So right now, is it just taking what he's saying and just transforming it into like text and sending it to the AI, or can you also detect his tone, his like?
Such a really great question. This version of GPT does have built into it tone. So I could have asked it, if I had kept it running, I guess it would tell me, did he appear happy, sad, worrisome? It knows, it is aware of how it could generate sentences that say those things. It can't always explain. The next thing I'm going to show you can explain why it's saying things, but yes, it can do that.
But it doesn't differentiate people's voices, right?
It does not differentiate people's voices in this version.
Okay.
That's why I was able to just
Yeah.
Yeah. If it had said, hey, Kevin, stop talking. Hello.
Good morning. I heard you might need a clicker.
Oh,
One. Do you
I'm good. You can leave it for, well, are you going to come pick it up in an hour? Do you need a clicker?
Yeah, can you leave it here?
Okay.
Sure. I'll just
Go ahead. Yes, sorry. What was that question? Did I answer it?
Thanks.
Yeah, about voices, yeah.
Okay, got it.
Could it like potentially hear sarcasm and understand that? Like if like
Totally.
I can? Okay.
Yeah. That one's probably, let me see if it'll let me do this. Are you still there?
I sure am. I'm right here whenever you need me. If there's anything else you want to add, or if you just need to check in, feel free to let me know.
This is Dr. Johnson. How did the patient seem to you? Were they happy, sad, depressed?
Hello, Dr. Johnson. Absolutely happy to fill you in. So Akshay described feeling quite down and mentioned he was dealing with depression that's making it hard for him to get out of bed.
No, I know
He
that. But
definitely-
how did he sound to you?
Oh, I see what you mean. Absolutely, Dr. Johnson. So just from our chat, Akshay did sound quite low and understandably distressed. He was polite and open, but you could tell he was having a tough time.
Did he ever get frustrated?
He didn't seem frustrated with me at all. He was actually pretty patient and just sharing what he was going through. So overall, I'd say he was more just down and in discomfort rather than frustrated.
Had he been happy, how would he have sounded different?
Well, if he had been feeling happy, I think he probably would have sounded a bit more upbeat or energetic, maybe a bit more cheerful in his tone. But as it was, he definitely sounded like someone who was just kind of weighed down by what he was dealing with. So that's
Let's
how I put it.
let's try
He
an
was more on the
experiment.
low.
Let's try an experiment. I want you to say the words, "I'm feeling fine," as if I'm happy.
Absolutely, let's give it a try. So if I were saying it as if I'm happy, I might say, I'm feeling fine, with a bit of a smile on my voice, just like that.
And what if I was being sarcastic and I'm actually pretty sick?
Oh, sure, that would sound a little different. If I were being sarcastic and not actually feeling well, I might say something like, yeah, I'm feeling fine, but with a bit of a flat or ironic tone. It's all in the delivery.
And so that's it. That's audio in, audio out. That makes me believe, I have to test it, that it's aware of the audio file that would be necessary to generate a sad fine versus a happy fine, etc. Again, early stuff, we got to play with it more. Yes?
Where's the data set coming from? I don't know if you would know this, but I'm just curious where you're getting the data to train this model and also how big the data set might be.
I do know this. If you could take every single piece of information on the internet that's in the public space, and a simple analogy that's been used is if you are a 3-year-old, every single thing that you have ever seen and heard about in your entire life is basically what's being used to train this. Stated slightly differently, it's everything that's in the public internet that includes images, audio files, TikToks, which of course contain lots of video and audio and transcripts. And that's continually evolving. And now these models have the ability to do web searching, which means they can try to answer questions about something today, but they go online and they search for it. Yes?
So the reason why this doesn't offer any solutions or anything like help is because like there's FDA regulations around that. Like I remember is what I'm assuming. Because
No, it's simpler. It's because there's a risk of hallucinations.
Risk of hallucinations.
So
okay.
the FDA will probably never have to see this, although you're right. If I said, Akshay, I'm really concerned about you. I'd like you to take some Benadryl to see if it'll make you stop whatever symptom you're having. That would be against the law.
Okay. Yeah. So I was just wondering, like, is there any regulatory body that looks for programs or softwares like this that have been offering aid? You know what I mean? That do these things that are against the law and restricts them?
Yeah. Well, the FDA.
Okay.
I mean, if you're not FDA approved, patients don't know about FDA approval. So there's an issue with like companies that I'm not going to talk about, but like Character AI, which was one that Google supported, that had a child kill himself based on some advice it received. There have been multiple examples of this in toy systems that have caused the way they develop this type of technology, and certainly when we deploy it and talk about it, to be tailored. But it's a real issue. As you could tell, I didn't go and ask it, but I could have, about gardening, just to see how far it would go. I probably could try to ask it about bomb making, and it's probably going to tell me it can't. People play these games and try to hack through, and unfortunately, I as the physician would be liable for that. So if you decided you were going to try ivermectin to treat your COVID, and it convinced you that there's data that suggests that, which is completely false, and you did it and it killed you, I'd be the one who's liable, if in fact I was the one who told you to use it. So that's how it all goes. There's a question here.
Sort of along the same lines. If you had asked it to diagnose you or give you a recommendation for medicine, would it have said no? And then if it had said no, what sort of regulation is put in place in the ballot?
The regulation that's in the answer is it will say no. And the regulation is that you are not allowed to do that. Under no circumstances should you give anything that resembles a diagnosis or treatment recommendation.
Is that coded into the bot?
It's in the prompt. It's an important point that I say it's in the prompt, because that means if it's not, and you don't get to see the prompt, right? So if it's not on the prompt, you could pull that off.
Okay.
So if the people who are writing these and selling them aren't aware of the safeguards that one needs to do it in medicine, then you do risk something in terms of health. Yes, last question for a sec.
Okay, so clearly, like, it didn't have access to, like, his my chart or whatever, but are you planning to add that kind of, like, access so it has a kind of history of past symptoms, or would that be too much of a violation?
It wouldn't be too much of a violation. I will tell you, as a person who you may have heard, I was the CIO at Vanderbilt, which is a pretty big organization. I know what the advantages will be to connecting it to Epic, but I'm also, or Cerner, or some of the other systems, but I'm also aware of some of the risks. One of the biggest risks was announced last week. It's not the risk I care about, but one of the risks that was announced last week was after more than $1 billion has been put into ambient scribing and attached to Epic, Epic announced they're going to make their own ambient scribing system. And for those of you who know anything about the history of software, there was a famous story that none of you read about, but you now will, about the Apple Flashlight app. The Apple Flashlight app was actually in the App Store, made by regular people like you. It was making a lot of money. And Apple suddenly realized, and it's part of the way they've written the term of agreement for the App Store, they could just make this. Everybody wants it. So they just made it. And overnight, the Flashlight app was completely gone. So any money they made, any investments people made, all wasted. Similar thing is now happening with Epic announcing this, that Abridge and DAX and Nabla and Ambience, all these companies that I'm just going to talk about briefly, are now all wondering, well, now what do we do? Is Epic going to basically steal all of our inventions as soon as we touch Epic? I know from answering the program, having signed the contract at our place for our, almost $500 million worth of investment, that Epic has a thing called program property, and anything that touches their program property, they have the ability, if they want to create a version of that, unless you explicitly said you cannot do it. So it's a very complicated world, and again, regulations in weird places. I'm going to zip through a couple of things because I want to make sure how much time do I have?
11:45.
Oh, great. So we're doing better than I thought. So the future of AI in healthcare, you've seen a glimpse of it, and I'm going to show you one more thing since we still have time. But this is actually out of a report that we just released from the National Academy of Medicine, trying to talk about the fact that there are risks, and you can see the risks on the left, but there are also these are opportunities at the bottom, and we're imagining these waves that are based on what you just saw. So PCP-bot represents essentially the beginning of this sort of medical diagnosis, misdiagnosis space. I would have changed that slightly to say missed agenda items, because PCP-bot now knows what it is that Aske wants to talk about. And theoretically, I as a practitioner could say, have I covered everything I was supposed to cover? And it could then come back and say, well, you were supposed to talk about is depression. That's one of the things that would be missed, that we now know that we have technologies that can solve them. And again, you can take a look at this. There's work going on in all of these areas, but only a few of these areas are actually at a point where we would try these things out with patients. This question over here. No hand? Oh, that's not hand. Okay. Let me take a break. Let's try this. So you want to see the coolest, newest thing? As if that wasn't cool and new? I don't know if this is going to work, but we will see. Okay. Come on. Please find it. Okay. So if you guys want to see this, because I can't show it any other way, you need to come up and see it here. If anybody else is clever, I can't get it to show up on there. So anybody wants to see this, come on Cloud. And once you guys hear it, you're all going to want to see it. I have to ask you, for me to make this work, you have to be kind of quiet because it will be listening to everything going on in this room. Can you hear me?
Yes,
What do you see?
I see a group of students in a classroom setting. That's right.
What are they doing?
From what?
Super sensitive to sound. It's writing it, right? Let's try this again. What it's saying is, I'll just move this up here. It says, from what I can see in the image, it looks like they are standing, sitting, and working on their laptops. Is there anything specific you would like to look for? So I'm going to try it again. Yes, I'm curious what time of day you think it is.
Based on the lighting in the room, it looks like it's daytime. Does that sound right?
It does. Where are we? Any idea what organization we're at?
Based on the sign that says Wharton, it looks like we're at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. Would you agree?
I would agree. If there were anybody in this room who's a professor, can you tell me what they might be wearing?
Sure. It's tough to say for sure. But the man on the left side of the image seems more mature than the students. He's wearing a dark t-shirt and a blue jean jacket. Would you like me to look for anything else?
Yeah, what do you think of the guy next to him on his right?
The other man next to him is wearing a light blue button-down shirt.
Isn't he? I thought he was wearing white.
Apologies, you are correct. The man in the image to the right of the possible professor is wearing a white button-down shirt.
Okay, here's a hard question for you. Looking at the name tags, where do you think most of the people in the class are from?
Based on the names displayed on the name tags, it appears that many of the students may be of Asian descent. Is there anything else I can help you identify in this image?
I'm not sure I understand why you think that. Can you defend it?
Certainly. I observed names like Cyrus Ng, Brandon Ma, and Andy Wang on the name tags in the image, which are commonly associated with people of Asian descent. However, it's important to acknowledge that names don't always definitively indicate someone's origin, and people from various backgrounds may have these names. It was an inference based solely on the available information.
Anybody else have a question they want me to ask? Think of something super hard.
How old are the people?
That's an easy one. Anything else?
Could it tell who Dr. Luke Riley and Dr. Ray are?
Actually, like name them?
Yeah.
We won't do that because you can imagine what that would do if you were walking around the subway.
Class you think?
It just disclosed.
Okay, let's start with the first question, which was, how old are people in the room, except for him? How old do you think the people are in this room on average? What it wrote was, it's hard for me to say what the average age of the people is, and however, the majority of the people in the image appear to be in their early to late teens or early 20s.
I'll take that.
Anything else? One more question. Something hard, yes.
What class do you think they're learning right now? If you like do a 360?
Yeah, I'll have to do a 360. What do you think this class is trying to teach?
Okay, from the previous observations, it is safe to say that this class is trying to teach business. Can I assist you with other questions?
Sure. Why do you think this is not relevant?
The video is showing a presentation slide titled A Future of AI in Healthcare. It outlines the risks and opportunities associated with AI in healthcare, covering areas like claims processing, patient education.
Okay, you're correct, but what does that tell you about what we might be teaching in this class?
Given the original classroom setting and the slide about AI in healthcare, it suggests this class might be exploring the intersection of business or technology with the healthcare sector. Is that what you were going for?
Yes. One more question. Do you think the students have learned anything?
Without knowing what has been taught or discussed in the class, it's impossible for me to determine if the students have learned anything. Is there something specific you'd like me to look for that might suggest they have or have not learned something?
I'd actually like you to do that. Tell me what I should be looking for to make sure my students are learning.
Since you are asking,
This is sucking up major computational power.
look for in the image to infer if the students have learned something. Engagement. Look for students who seem attentive, are actively participating by looking at their computers, or interacting with each other in a way that suggests they're discussing the material. Facial expressions. Watch for students who appear thoughtful or focused. Body language. Do students seem relaxed and comfortable?
That's a great list. Looking at the room, what do you think? Is there anybody I should be concerned about not learning?
applying the engagement in your criteria.
It's too noisy. It said, let me try. Would you please say that again?
The person at the front desk is asleep. It seems he may not have learned anything, or might just be tired.
Okay, so there's your example of multimodal screening AI. This one actually would have listened to language, so if I had somebody speak a different language, it can actually tell me there's a person speaking that language. You can do all sorts of clever things with it. It's actually featured in that movie, The Thinking Game. So just so you know, this is a technology that if I were to ask you to imagine how healthcare could be redesigned, my first thinking is, why aren't we outfitting entire rooms with multimodal AI that we can then use to ask questions about how the business? So imagine we finished, you guys leave, and I say, how do you think I did? And it would say, well, you fumbled a little bit at the beginning. The class seemed engaged when you talked about this, but a few people had their eyes closed or were looking at their phones when you talked about that. That is actually available and doable right now. It's just expensive as can be and will kill a small country in the process of trying to do computing, which is not an insignificant problem. Question?
No, I was just gonna say that would be far too computationally expensive to do practically, and that you could also get the same benefits by introspecting a little.
Yes.
Or watching a recording.
Exactly. But it's so much less funny. Yeah. So anyway, but you can see where this technology is going and why it is that it's more fun to show it to you than to talk about it in slides. Let me talk about this last little piece and then answer some questions. So yes, we have already touched on technical, ethical, and legal considerations. This is actually an important, so we just finished a scoping review to look at all the literature that's out about primary care and AI. And there were a whopping 6 papers out of all the papers that we saw that had anything to do with common use of AI in primary care. And every single one of those was in this area called ambient scribing. What you saw in the chatbot was sort of what happens in ambient scribing, which is literally a physician puts this in front of her patient, says, is it okay if I record your visit because it'll help me to summarize it, I don't have to use the computer. You have your entire visit, you can talk about the kids, talk about the grandparents, talk about the weather, talk about the diseases, talk about some other things you haven't talked about, and it will generate a summary of all of the pertinent medical information and actually put it in the chart. This is the only technology so far that has decreased that number I mentioned to you about people's willingness to re-engage in primary care. So it's going crazy, you'll see it everywhere. Has anybody run into a doctor yet who used it with your visit? One.
Just this past winter, right before I came to school.
Yeah, it's just because it's expensive, right? So we have to make some decisions, and part of this documentary is going to be that if the entire primary care system actually isn't ready for this, what do we do? Because federally qualified health centers will not be able to afford this unless they get subsidies. That's an example. So this other thing I want to mention, which is just a pet peeve, when you start to read this literature, and you will likely run into things, people will talk about this thing called the AUC, which is short for the area under the receiver operating characteristics curve. It's a fancy set of words that basically mean how well does the system generally perform in terms of finding people who have a thing that should be found and never finding people who don't have a thing that should be found. Okay? Or sensitivity, specificity, positive and negative predictive values, 2 different curves. The point is everybody produces that. They say, my technology is amazing. It's got an AUC of 0.9. That's great. Every lab test you've ever done, had done to you, has an AUC. When people decide to use the test, has to do with not just the AUC, but how well integrated is it into your practice, into your workflow, how diagnostic is it, lots and lots of other conditions. And so I won't bore you with this, but we have written papers about all of this. This is a piece in JAMA from a couple of years ago that just basically says there's a way that healthcare needs to define problems so that we can use this technology in areas where it's going to perform well and not cause ethical or other dilemmas. I mentioned the chatbot piece, so let me just talk about this. So I've just produced another chatbot. I've produced a new app. It's called Life Copilot. It's an AI-based social worker app. And the idea is, by the way, generated with DALL-E and generated with ChatGPT. So I'm saying this is a great app for mothers like this one, whose kids are busy playing in trash in the backyard. They just want to find a central, clean place in town to take their kids. So there's this wonderful app. It shows you all the different places you could go. It gives you access to directions. So now the question is, you're all able to use this in your families or recommend it to your neighbors. What are you worried about? Like, what don't you know that would make you decide whether you want to use this or not? Anybody have any thoughts about that? Let's see, Drew.
I guess it might not give information about like the current state of the park or like how like accurate like the actual locations are. Like if it's an AI-based app, it might not like flag certain locations as a park.
Exactly. That's a great one. Let's see. Brandon hasn't said much.
Something that has come up with something like this, I think in my high school someone proposed an idea like this, is safety of just like random people going to the park when you know other kids are going as well.
Yeah, there's that. Didn't think of that one. Welcome to 2025. Let's see, Lexi?
I had the same idea.
Okay, Arian?
So are these, well, I just had a quick question. Are these like public parks, all of them, or could they be like privately?
Don't know.
Okay, well then if they're a mix, then I'd be curious as to like if this app is being backed by like a private, like someone with a stakeholder interest, like private parks, like then it's a little skewed.
Exactly. Or even, for example, if the parking costs money. So to get there, you have to park. So there is this idea that for us to develop apps like that, we need to also be developing what we call a nutrition label. That essentially says who created it, what's it used for, what are the data sources, when was it last updated, and testing, right? And if you look at what I put here, you can imagine for a lot of us, we would be like, whoa, I don't think I'm going to use this app, right? But this data, I challenge you to go look for an app and find this information. You'll have this slide, just try it for fun. You will find that almost nobody tells you any of this. And furthermore, when you go down to the bottom of their website, there's probably not even an email address anymore. So like you cannot figure out who built these things. So these are the kinds of issues. And yes, this was generated with GPT. How many ethicists does it take to change an opinion? At least 2. On the other hand, take consider, however, it's not that funny, but that's what GPT generated. The point being that there are these technical, ethical, and legal considerations. These are the main areas. We've talked about a bunch of them already. Data privacy, especially an issue in medicine because most of us don't really want our data to be public. Algorithmic bias, which has to do with the fact that when you train the models themselves will faithfully reproduce the performance of their training set. If their training set has a particular distribution, let's say we only get college-level students to train on it, it's not necessarily going to work for geriatric patients. It can be tested, may surprisingly work, that's called an emergent property, but it actually may not work, and so it has to be tested. Error accountability. Fingers pointing squarely at me. In medicine, if anybody uses one of these technologies that I've recommended, or if I'm using a technology that my hospital's recommended, I'm actually still the one who's accountable. The law certainly is not in favor of me helping anybody else use a technology that hasn't been tested. Even if it's FDA approved, I could still be accountable depending on if my population was biased and I should have known better, et cetera, et cetera. And then transparency of decisions. You guys brought up great questions when I was showing you the first chatbot, and I think you're really aware of the fact that although these can tell you why, you have to ask them why. And even if you ask it, it's important that you remember in the generative AI space, it is predicting words based on tokens that follow each other. It's not thinking about the work it just did and trying to explain it to you. So it's been well studied that the explanations that demonstrate the work that's being done, in general, don't actually connect to the work that's being done by AI. It just sort of talks a great game. By the way, something most college students are used to, so there it is. I will also tell you, though, that there's a strategy around this. For a super advanced person in the class, does anybody know what the strategy is to make sure that AI is a little bit more explainable? Well, okay, wait, let's see, he has only asked one other question.
Like the chain of thought. Like
chain of thought, what the heck is that?
Just making the AI explain its steps as it goes through it so that you can understand its thought process. And
Exactly.
kind of prevents errors in like middle steps as well.
Exactly, beautifully done. You can also do it before. So one of the things I'll typically do is I'll say, what are the components of an excellent letter of recommendation for someone I really hope gets into whatever school they're in? And this is a hint that yes, I sure as heck do use this to write letters of recommendation. I read them, but it does write them. It's much easier to edit than to create. So then it gives me a list of things it thinks are important. And then I give it the CV, and I say, can you find that list of things that you said are important in this CV? What I'm actually doing is I'm bringing the tokens to the front so that it's applying those tokens to its letter. And then I can tell it which ones are wrong, which ones are important, blah, blah, blah. And then I say, write a letter. And it's amazing how well that works. And you can change all sorts of little things in it. But the point is, transparency of decisions is not baked into any of these technologies, especially in machine learning, but even in AI, in generative AI. So if this were working, I would ask you to rank these ethical concerns regarding AI in healthcare in order of importance. And I'm going to show you this. Oh, I can't show you because that's not in the slide. So the key point is that of the ones I just mentioned, data privacy is probably the one most people are concerned about. And then the second one that's a really big issue is algorithmic bias. And they're related, right? Because if I have a model that has been trained on data, that's the only data I can get, and the only data I'm getting is from a group of people who are, say, dying and they don't care, or too young to be able to know what the risks are, then it may not work at all for the population I most need it for, like this one, where the study was in that little Chapa Best Medical Hospital, right? The chances are a person living on the main line doesn't actually need to know where the parks are. It's going to be somebody in a completely different environment, likely not being seen at Best Medical Hospital. Okay, so it's a complicated area, and that's why it takes so many of them.
It was something we brought up last time we spoke to this group.
Yeah.
In this class, and that is, given that these LLMs are basically bias optimizers, and they're outputting data that's input into the internet, aren't the bias optimizers optimizing against each other, so you get a compound effect, potentially?
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. There's no evidence that that's how it happens. So I can't say that, I cannot say how it actually is trying to perform, but it's easy to show that that's actually not what's happening. So, the best examples of that would be the early examples where people were saying, like, draw a cartoon of Mount Rushmore, and one of them would be a woman, right? So it's mitigating against the bias, but it's doing it in a way that's actually wrong. It's generating false information. And so far what I've seen is that there's no attempt at being able to sort of objectify the bias by either adding more data or actually changing the prime model prompts, so-called system prompts, to do a different activity. A great question to ask Ethan Mullick. I'll have to ask him that. I think you two know him.
Yeah, so, it would be interesting what the situation is in 5 years' time.
Oh, I think it's going to be better, because another thing that people are using it for is this so-called LLM as a judge. I didn't get into that, but just to talk about it, I do this all the time. I will write something, and then I'll have a completely separate one, like Google Notebook LM, read it and critique it. And then I'll just go back and forth until I believe that the critique is intentional on my part, and that's what I'm done with. But it still takes me so much less time to do that than it would have done to do it de novo. And by the way, I'm biased, right? I'm biased, I get tired, so the notes I write on certain days of the week are distracted by my dog who wants to go to the park, and I realize all that. So I view these notes, or I view this use of GPT for me, as the most objective way I can get work done. Recognizing that I'm biased, because I'm bringing in an example of a previous note. I'm bringing in a CV that only talks about certain parts. Like, you won't see my book series in my CV, but if it was relevant to the letter, there's no way you could find it unless you were to then ask GPT to specifically search on things it didn't see in the CV about me. So you can do all of this, but it just gets more and more levels of sophistication. Sumit.
Yeah. So for like the chatbots, like if the ethical concerns were overcome, how do you kind of foresee like the integration, like patients like readily like using them and like trusting them, like especially like in like actual healthcare setting?
Yeah, this is the hardest problem. Because right now, and this is a little bit of what we're going to do in this documentary we're working on, but patients are terrified of this. Like, one group of people think this is some scary stuff, and the more they learn, the worse it gets. Another group of patients probably, I don't know, I have to see, I don't know how you guys are about this. I'm an early adopter. I love stuff like this because I sort of believe I can see through the BS, right? Maybe I can't. So I don't know which group I represent, but I can tell you the majority of patients at places like Penn are all saying yes to the use of ambient scribing in the room, as long as we are careful not to oversell the AI piece. So you just say, I'm using AI to help make my notes so that I can watch you. You don't say, I'm sending all the information into the cloud, but it's under this password-protected, two-factor authentication thing. Suddenly this sounds like a bunch of mumbo-jumbo, and most people would be like, I don't think I want you to do that. It's a great question. Brandon, was it? No. Cyrus, you had a question, sorry.
Wait, this is just following on like Dr. Ray's question. It's about like mitigating bias. Like, I don't know if this works, but what if you just passed it to multiple different models? Would that mitigate the bias?
No, because unfortunately all the models are trained on the exact same stuff.
Oh, what if it's different data that it's trained on?
Well, if it was different data, then theoretically it would have two different biases. That's the point you're bringing up. So then they would hopefully, if you were lucky, they would in some ways not be complementary. They would be something antagonistic, which would approach the generative, again, adversarial network strategy. But in general, all these models are starving to get more and more data. Just to say a name, anybody here heard of Yann LeCun? So Yann LeCun used to be the head of AI at Meta. He's been replaced by somebody else. He's still kind of in the AI research space at Meta. And he's really famous for basically saying that he thinks we may be at the end of what is really cool about large language models being able to do, precisely because of these points. The number one thing he says is the only way to mitigate the bias is for models to start to understand a worldview. Or to put it back to the three-year-olds, what is it that three-year-old brains do at night, right? Well, what they do at night is they exercise, test out, maybe generate metadata around the knowledge that they've been accumulating all day, right? Like, I pushed this off of here and it fell on the floor, and at some point they start recognizing there is this thing called gravity that they didn't see, but things that you put on, that you push will go down. They don't have to be taught that. They see it, they figure out the association, and they associate it with everything else in the room. Like, I'm pretty sure that if I take you and I push you, you will go down to the ground, right? They didn't necessarily have to see it. That whole process of what's called worldview assembly is what LLMs currently can't do. So we think that one of the ways to get around the biases is going to be to put them in the world and let them just see and experience and process. Unfortunately, in the world that we're in right now, I'm incredibly skeptical that that would be I would not want it to learn necessarily from at least what's happening here. Maybe if I sent it to Amsterdam, it would be great. But we're going to figure all this out. This is why we have brilliant people like you all around this campus thinking about these problems. Yes?
From a legal standpoint, how do you think physicians will overcome the hurdle of having to absorb accountability of their AI bots?
I think we are going to have to make a tough decision here. So Waymo has had a few. Anybody else been in Waymo? Okay, a few people. Waymo's coming to Philly, by the way, if you didn't know that. I think the big issue is going to be what we learn about autonomous driving, right? Self-driving cars obviously have to be accountable. But right now they actually are not really. And so we have to figure out a way to start thinking through who is the right person. Like right now in a self-driving car, you're taking this on yourself, basically. If the car has an accident, it's going to be, Waymo has had accidents, and there is case law. It has not been settled, so every case is viewed differently. But I think that's fundamentally the issue. We're going to have to get to a place where we're beyond case law, and where someone has decided that the companies themselves have accountability. The data sources are probably not accountable because it's typically incidental data, unless you've basically spent money to get your own data. So we're going to need that to be figured out. It's a tough problem.
You mentioned Malik, and I read the Co-Intelligence book, and he lays great stress on prompt engineering. How do you feel that's going to play into the educational experience, the educational process in all genres, but especially in medicine?
If what you're saying, and I hear the words, if what you're saying is, to what extent do we need to view prompt engineers as accountable? Is that what you're saying?
It's, for example, my wife is an elementary school teacher, so a concern is that you can create bias in little people by giving them the answer up front, but then not having to really think about it. Once that bias is established, it almost is built in. And the question is with naive interrogators of a chatbot, let us say, how do we go about making the types of questions they're asking more refined and more nuanced, if they don't have the benefit of hindsight that older people like ourselves have, for example?
Yeah, I guess the right answer is I don't know. There's a bunch of nuance in this space. So number one, there are people who are more experienced than we may be, especially the people who've written a lot of these models, in getting them to behave a specific way, reproducibly, with what's called zero shot. Just if you get the right words in place, it does the thing you want. A lot of animators, for example, are building art that is ridiculously, amazingly good. And I've talked with one or two of them, and they are using, 1,000-word prompts. They are developing a library of personalities so that they can assume that if they put the exact same text into any one of the systems that are generating good animation, they will get roughly the exact same person out and the same actions out. That's unbelievably complex, and computationally kind of amazing too. So I think there's a role for the rest of us to learn something about prompt engineering. GPT-5 did announce that they are no longer as wedded to the way we have been teaching prompt engineering. It's way better now at figuring it out. If you didn't know, there are books about this, but there's also been a couple of courses. Fundamentally, there's a way to write your prompts that basically starts out by giving it a role, assigning it a task, and then giving it the details. And the details can either be through what's called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation, i.e. you drop something in to the mixed space that the prompt is in. It generates its own vectors for those words and only uses those vectors in the answer. Or it mostly just uses, depending on the question. So there's a series of strategies like that most people don't know. Some people are learning them. But as quickly as you learn them, there's a brand new model that maybe uses something completely different. Yes?
Has anybody thought of just using AI to make prompts?
Everybody uses AI. I mean, I use AI all the time to make prompts.
So then you don't really need to know all that, right?
You totally need to know all that, because how does AI make a prompt?
Maybe not say about the prompt.
I'm not going to restate it.
You ask him to make the prompt.
And then what's it do?
And then it makes the prompt.
It does not make the prompt.
It makes this. What do you mean?
I know this is hard, and he's laughing at you because he gets it. This is right. What does it do?
It generates the token after, like what it expects.
Yeah,
the next word
it's trying to keep attention. Right? There's a paper called "Attention is All You Need." That's a classic paper about all this transformer stuff. What AI does is it figures out the first token, typically based on a word that you put in your sentence, and then it looks at probabilistically what are the next set of tokens. So it's going to make a prompt. The prompt's going to look really good. It could be one giant huge hallucination. I can't tell you how many times I've asked it to make a prompt for me that just doesn't work at all, because it has no idea. And it will simply say, as you've all noted, "You are so right. That prompt has so many problems. Here's a different version." And then you can say, "That one sucks too. You're right, I see it." It doesn't know a thing about what it's doing. But what you can do is you can ask it, what are the components of a good prompt? And it does a reasonably good job because it keeps attention on what you're getting at, your good prompt and components, to give you components. You can then use those components to improve. It generally does a better job. Play with that. Just go to GPT or this is Google Notebook LM also does that, and ask it to make some changes in a prompt that you've already created and see if it makes it work better.
But let's say you're trying to make like an art, right? You're trying to make an art, and you have a general idea in place of what you want the art to be like, and you ask the AI, right, to like expand upon what I just said into a bigger prompt that I can put into the AI that generates art. Wouldn't it generate more detail for you so that your art can be more detailed?
Especially the newer AI does that. This is generated with AI. It actually took me quite a while to get it to do this. And this was basically just, I gave it my PowerPoint presentation, I gave it a prompt, and said, give me a cartoon version of the talk that I'm giving with a summary of all the key points that are discussed. And then just because you guys, have everybody used Google Notebook LM? Who has not? All right, I'll show you 2 seconds of something, and then I'm going to finish answering that question. Google Notebook also makes podcasts.
It feels like every time you blink, there's a new headline about artificial intelligence shaking things up.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And healthcare, well, with all its complexities, it's definitely right in the middle of this whirlwind.
It really is. And look, for anyone trying to keep pace, it can feel pretty overwhelming. You want the essential info right clearly, quickly.
Without getting totally lost in the weeds, yeah.
Exactly.
That's really why we've taken this deep dive into a presentation. It's titled HCMG 1010 AI and Health by Dr. Kevin B. Johnson from UPenn. Think of this as like your express, it feels like every time you...
I will not force you to listen to all that. But what I'll tell you that's really funny to this point is, I said, make a 2-minute podcast. It then made a 10-minute podcast with 2 minutes of conversation about what I was talking about. And then I said, no, I only want the entire podcast, beginning to end, to be 2 minutes. It just won't do it. It's something about the system prompt that is forcing it to do certain things. It even says, Dr. Johnson, in 2 minutes, talks about the following things, and then it takes 5 minutes to do that. So it doesn't quite get what I'm saying. And the best example of this, and I'll just leave with this point, and then we have 5 minutes to ask you questions. One of the reasons why you don't see a lot of people using it in uncharted waters is because early on in the days of generative AI, both Microsoft and Anthropic were the first two out of the gate, really. Meta stuff wasn't all that good, and Google had just had Bard, and it wasn't all that great. But they made a decision that they were not going to allow the AI to use computer technology to execute answers to prompts. And the reason for that, they have a whole book called Code Book that talked about this. And one of the examples was, if you say to the AI today, or even back then, figure out how to clean my room's windows in the most efficient way possible, one of the options would be to get a crane to knock your windows out of the wall, which is actually the most efficient way to clean a window on both sides. Is just take it out, right? But we don't really want it to do that. You don't want to go home and find this bulldozer, cleaning up the mess from the crane that you had just ordered. So before they allowed agentic AI to come in, they had to do a tremendous amount of testing to make sure that, and you can still do stuff that you don't really want it to do, but it can do some stuff, especially now with vibe coding, which I'm sure you've heard about. But you can have it try to do certain things, and if it can find a path in its system prompt, which we don't all get to see, it will try to do that. So you can use agentic AI to do a lot of things. And I would encourage you, one of the editors from the New York, I think it was David Leonard did this from the New York Times, spent an entire day saying yes to everything GPT was going to ask it to do, and asking every decision to be made by GPT. What restaurant, what time to go to sleep, what time to wake up, just anything that came up the whole day long, and said it was one of the best days of his life. Like, it worked unbelievably well to do really cool and creative things. But he acknowledged in the piece, he had a sense of what he wanted, so occasionally it would come up with something he'd be like, well, that's not at all what I would want, you should know me better than that. So again, it's an interactive process. So we're very early in this. I wanted to spend some time talking about it so that you could see how fast it's moving. Hopefully you've got a sense of that. I got a couple more minutes to answer questions. These have been great, and thank you guys very much. Yes. Lorenzo, sorry.
Hi, my question is slightly different. I was wondering how you thought AI might specifically change like the biomedical research space, like maybe like drug development, something like that, and whether you think that like obtaining a PhD, say it'll take me, I don't know, 10 years to get a PhD, do you think that will lose its value in 10 years' time? The way AI is developing?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question. So AI in biomedical research has taken off even faster than DeepMind would tell you it was going to back in this movie. The most recent set of work has been, because we now have agentic AI, which can program robots to build things, building actual labs in a giant space. This is actually happening. MIT, New England Journal of Medicine AI podcast, talked to the guy who's been doing this. I think his name is Andy something, but there's too many names. My head is full. But basically, building a lab that is 100% configurable, 100% run by AI and robots. So the AI technologies propose experiments, find a space where there is vacancy, manufacture using the system that they built, it's now IP protected, devices that can actually run the experiment, program the robots to do all the aspects of the experiments, and then execute the experiments, get the results back, and decide what to do next, which is phenomenal. They're using this a lot for drug discovery, but they're also using it a lot for developing new materials, which is a lot of what happens in terms of, what's the next thing from silicon, or what's going to replace plastic, So they're doing a lot of that, and we are now seeing that in drug discovery all over the place. We're seeing that in therapeutic testing of different types of medicines. I actually was a big proponent of something that surprisingly happened, which is I pushed the NIH to try to stop doing research on animals because we now have organ on a chip. So while I was on the NIH council, I actually said we didn't approve a concept because I said I don't see how we get out of primate research here, and yet there's a lot of technology that we can now use to get out of primate research, which which I personally think is really deplorable. I don't even like mouse or zebrafish research for that matter, but that's the whole thing. So, long story short, yes, there are people looking at all of that stuff now.
So do you think my getting a PhD in 10 years?
Oh, sorry.
will become like
Yeah, I think